China is pushing to improve innovation in schools. New approaches are being developed to better transition students from schools to the workplace. Albert Park is the Director of Emerging Market Studies at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and I asked him if we could see more innovation when it comes to teaching.
I hope so. I think the initiatives to promote innovation in China have focused so far more on the investments in scientists and investments by enterprises in research and development, much more kind of direct innovation applications to production. But obviously, to really foster an innovative society, it needs to reach the schools. And so there are efforts, I think, in the Chinese school system to reform curriculum, make it less rote learning and more focused on problem solving, especially at the secondary school level and at the university level. But that's still relatively early on in the implementation of these reforms, so there's a lot of progress that needs to happen.
What about when it comes to schooling itself there? Is there a growing demand or a need, rather, for private education in China? What is the perception of private education? Is it becoming more of an option for families?
I think the private sector in education is growing fast from a small base. The Chinese educational system is still dominated by public schools. I think with greater incomes and resources, more families feel that they can pay for private schooling options. And also, the private sector can respond more to the diversity of the types of education that different parents may demand. So I think it should be a growing sector in China's future. At the same time, the Chinese government has regulatory concerns. They're worried about whether these private institutions are teaching to an adequate standard, especially migrant schools, for instance, schools tailored towards lower income students.
Albert, over the years, what have you noticed has been the biggest changes or trends that you've noticed in education in China?
Well, I think the big challenge for the educational system in China is that China is a rapidly growing and rapidly changing economy, and so the demands for the types of skills that workers will need are changing very fast. And so the education system is trying to hit a moving target, trying to figure out what are the training needs going to be for people's futures. Obviously, when you finish schooling, you have decades in the labor market, not just the immediate employment concerns. And so that's been a difficulty. Obviously, China has expanded higher education, college education dramatically, and that's led to some difficulty employing recent college graduates. I still think for most Chinese families, it makes complete sense to send your child to college. The lifetime returns will be much higher, and the productivity benefits for the economy also will be much greater. But when you're trying to absorb lots of students very quickly, that introduces some challenges and requires perhaps some patience and perhaps some mismatches or underemployment of college graduates in the short term, especially periods of downturn. But I still think it's the right strategy. China still needs to increase the share of its labor force that are highly educated. It's still relatively low at something like less than 15% of the adult labor force with college degrees.
Albert Park, thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles.